welcome back to The Price of Business. I am your host, Kevin Price, watching the opening of Get Smart on YouTube. And it's very difficult for me to both talk and watch one of my favorite shows as a kid growing up, the late, great Don Adams, created by Mel Brooks and Buck Henry. And Agent 99 was kind of hot, even when I was a little kid. And, it's very, very good music because like he was chasing chaos, we're going to talk about chaos and confusion. There's a lot of concerns, particularly of those of the Libertarian and Tea Party variety. Increasingly, I can put those in similar numbers over about the fact that the government is creating chaos. Huge amounts of money, prolific amounts of money being printed by the federal government, unseen, very, very Zimbabwe-looking currency that the United States has developed, with literally trillions of dollars being created on single days. Over $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion on a single day, for several months, over $50 billion of new money being pumped into the money supply. That's how you create Weimar Republic currencies, and it looks like that's what we were doing there for a while. And I think that there's a lot of state leaders. In fact, there's speculations a few years ago about states creating competing currencies out there. And I, for one, believe competition is good in all areas, including in currencies. And for those who think that may have been just a passing trend, interesting news on, it looks like on Friday, Governor Greg Abbott, our Republican governor here in Texas, signed House Bill 483 into law, which will establish a state gold bullion depository. According to the governor's office, the law will repatriate $1 billion in gold from the Federal Reserve in New York to the new state depository. The Office of the Comptroller will administer the depository, which will serve, quote, as the custodian, guardian, and administrator of bullion that will come to the state of Texas, the release said. The governor said, today I signed HB 483 to provide a secure facility for the state of Texas, state agencies, and Texas citizens to store gold, bullion, and other precious metals. With the passage of this bill, the Texas Bouillion Depository will become the first state-level facility of its kind in the nation, increasing the security and stability of our gold reserves and keeping taxpayer funds from leaving Texas to pay for fees to store gold in facilities outside our state.
Yeah, and it's going to be in Mattress Max facility.
It's going to be for the extra firm edition of the Mac KTEK.
That's it. It's going to be Mattress Mac will be the custodian.
This is as hard as metal. It is metal.
It's like the Princess and the Pea.
Yeah.
Did you know that Zimbabwe has like quadrillion notes that equal to like $5?
Yes. And in fact, if you wonder where the world's largest millionaire population in the world is, it is in Zimbabwe.
That's right.
Everyone in Zimbabwe is a multi-millionaire.
That's right.
Many are billionaires.
But no one can afford a tank of gas or a loaf of bread.
Right, yet it has 80%, close to 80% unemployment.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, and how did this happen? And of all the currencies, they chose a dollar, the name dollar, for their currency. We appreciate the humor of all that.
Right.
For us, free market types, we love to be able to draw on, what is a million worth? Well, it depends on what backs that million. In Zimbabwe, not very much.
In the United States, not very much.
Right. Good faith and credit.
The good faith and credit of the United States. Oh, how's that working out for you, Obama, with your foreign policy? It's supposed to make the world love us again, and we're more hated than ever.
Who can say that without laughing?
Certainly,
good faith and credit.
Certainly less respected than ever.
Yeah,
right?
No question about it.
And Japan now owns, believe it or not, as much or if not more of our debt than China does.
Yeah. So what does Japan see that China has kind of cooled off on?
Yeah. I mean,
makes me worry because look where Japan's economy has been for the last few decades.
Well, but maybe it's more the point that China didn't want to keep throwing good money after bad, and so Japan is now stepping in because they haven't been making the best judgment as of late. I don't know. I'm just saying now Japan is really. In the 80s, they had major stock in our debt, and now they're back to it. So I don't know.
Community Digital. I wrote an article for RenewAmerica.com, and Community Digital News came out last week about the trade deficit, and people get excited because the trade deficit is shrinking. Reality is that means U.S. spending power is shrinking, and the reality is that other countries are less interested in the United States because countries with huge trade deficits means that other countries are interested in respending those monies back in the United States. And a great example of that is that you just referred to that. Not only did Japan have a huge part of our debt, but they were the single biggest real estate holders. That's what they were doing with the debt outside of the United States. In fact, they own half of Hawaii. If they, if the situation had been the same on December 7th, 1941, there probably wouldn't have been a bombing of Pearl Harbor because the Japanese owned too much of that island to want to destroy it. And that kind of goes back to what Frederick Bastiat said, that if goods are not crossing borders, troops are. Trade environments, positive trade environments create customers. Customers don't attack each other. And it's not a surprise that in 1939, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act becomes law. That created a huge barrier between the U.S. and the rest of the world. The rest of the world retaliated. What a surprise that between, 1929 rather, and by the mid-1930s, the world was at war.
Right. Well, I have a question because I keep hearing, is there a difference between trade deficit and federal deficit? Or are they talking about, when people say federal deficit, do they mean federal trade deficit?
When they talk about the federal deficit, they're usually talking about the annual, there's the total national debt, right, which is close to $20 trillion. The deficit is the amount for a single year. When they talk about the federal deficit, they're usually talking about the amount of the deficit for a single year, and then the national debt, and so it's purely how much the government owes.
Okay, but that's different than the trade deficit you're talking about.
Yeah,
and so. But aren't they saying...
Because that deficit is only growing.
Yeah, but they're trying to make it seem like it's shrinking.
But it's not. The federal deficit is
growing.
Is growing, yeah.
They have the ticker in like Times Square or something where it's...
Yeah, it's
like constantly going.
Ridiculous. They're trying to figure out how to add numbers to that thing that already has a lot of numbers. It's like, what the heck?
Well, so...
This should last for 100 years. So it's lasting 10.
So what Greg Abbott and some of the other Republicans are basically saying is, kind of like with the Confederacy... In the Civil War, they had their own currency.
Yep.
And so it's not showing, the states are not showing much faith in the credit of the United States federal government.
Yeah, absolutely, they're not.
Wow.
And do we blame them?
No, but I mean, it's almost that whole Texas secession kind of, feel that we have heard so often in the last decade. And it's not going anywhere, obviously. We're not going to secede from the Union, but maybe fiscally we are. I don't know. That's interesting.
Well, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that the Congress can make money, can make currency, but it doesn't say it has to be the only one. It doesn't say that they have an exclusive right to that. Yeah. And we know throughout U.S. history they haven't had an exclusive right. There's been various times where various states have had competing currencies. Most Americans don't realize that. The only times we have had that is whenever we've had central banks, which has been ever since the late 19th century is the longest one. There was one established in the early 18th century, or really right at the end of the the end of the 17th century rather, and it was abolished by Andrew Jackson. I say he's crazy, but that was actually one of his good causes when he got rid of the central bank. Then there was competing currencies really for decades in the United States. And competing currencies mean virtually no inflation is what that means. And so some of those currencies could become inflationary, but they get wiped out immediately because people get out of those currencies. It's that check of knowing that you can move to different currencies. And that's why Bitcoin has grown in so much interest in the last several years. People are seeing Bitcoins as a competing currency.
Yeah. But that's global. They're not even doing that just for the United States. And I don't know how Bitcoin's going to end up going, but
I believe the central governments will start acquiring Bitcoins all over the country.
What do you think about EXIM Bank, Export-Import Bank?
Well, I mean, the Export-Import Bank is a tool used by crony capitalism to support international funding of businesses that, often are competing against the United States, often done in the guise of helping developing countries. And a great example of how the United States has this ability to hurt countries that we say we want to help. We talk about cheap goods that are dumped in the United States, like China. Well, a lot of the third world talks about our cheap goods in the form of agriculture that are dumped in their economies that make it impossible for them to even develop agrarian economies.
Right.
To go beyond agrarian. And so we've destroyed Haiti's ability to recover, because that's about the only thing a country like Haiti can do is make agricultural goods. And we've just about nuked them with our cheap products going in there.
Right. Which aren't so cheap because, with the whole advent of the environmentally friendly eco-fuels, all that's done is eat up the corn crop and made it that much more expensive for places like Mexico and Honduras and Ecuador and those places to actually be able to afford tortillas. Exactly. Because it's raised the prices of those crops. Well, that's interesting. So what do you think is going to happen with this? Do you think Greg Abbott's going to get in trouble with the feds for wanting to do this, or what?
Greg Abbott is very bold. I'm very grateful that he's our governor. He's very bold, but he's also a lawyer, and he's a former attorney general of the state, and so he vetted this thing.
Gosh, I hate to say it, but he's got a leg to stand on.
Yeah, I hated to hear you say that.
Yeah.
But he vetted this thing thoroughly before he did it,
Gotcha.
And he would have shot warning shots over the bow if he was worried that there was going to be a problem.
Gotcha.
All right, we got to wrap it up with that. Do want to remind you this show continues 24/7 at priceofbusiness.com. Plus, the best content here shows up over there at usdatareview.com. Have a great day. Spend it wisely right here